Okay, so I am actually going to begin in respect for those who arrived on time, and hopefully everyone will realize that they should show up on time. Oh, Nomi just joined. Okay, so we are actually going to be doing chapter 3 today. You know, the first few chapters of Tanya actually give sort of like highlights of what's to come. Hi, Nomi. Oh, you know what I'm going to do actually? I'm going to actually mute everybody. Just 1 second, just so we don't. Yeah. If anyone wants to unmute to ask, they could do that. Okay. The first few chapters of Tanya actually, set the tone and also give us highlights of what's to come. So, there are 53 chapters in the first part of Tanya. So whatever we learn today is actually going to be discussed in further detail all throughout the chapters. So therefore, it's not actually a complete assessment of the topic, but it is a highlight. Now, what does chapter 3 mainly discuss is the structure of our godly soul. So now we discussed in the last week's classes how, we don't only have one soul, we have God, we have two souls. What happens is that because we are human beings and the animal soul is what gives us life and what is found in our blood, and also it originates in a Jew from Klippas Noiga, it conceals godliness. So we're not always aware of our godly soul, and learning Tanya makes us more aware of our godly soul and helps us become in tune with that godly soul and access its powers. So what's interesting is that although the animal soul and the godly soul are similar in structure, Tanya first explains how the godly soul works before explaining how the animal soul works, because although they are similar in structure, they function in different ways, and we will be able to access the power and of the godly soul in order to overcome the animal soul. Okay, so let's understand this a little bit further. First of all, Hashem has a system of creation in this world which everything follows. In actual fact, when Hashem said to the angels, let us create man, Hashem used this expression, Naase Adam kitsalmeinu kidmoiseinu, let us make man in our image. Hashem did not say, let me create man in my image. Hashem said, let me create man in our image. And what does it mean, our image? The system of creation. In Tanya, the expression Tanya uses throughout is called hishtalshelus ha'olamos. It is not actually used in this chapter, but it is referred to in this chapter. It is the system whereby God has created the world, which is through the 10 svirot, the 10 attributes of godliness. In other words, pure godliness cannot reach this world without a certain filter, without a certain channel, we will read more in the further chapters how the system is actually called Tzimtzum. But in order for godliness to come into the world, godliness has to go through a gestation, which we actually mentioned last week, which means that the spark of godliness, before it comes down into this world, passes through a certain system, which is the 10 spheres. And the godly soul, as well as the animal soul, and we'll get to the animal soul in chapter 6, but the godly soul expresses itself through these 10 attributes, and actually it has become known as the powers of the soul. So the 10 attributes are actually divided into two groups. The first group is Chachma, Bina, and Da'as, which is the acronym for Chabad, which is the intellect of the soul. And the last 7 attributes are Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Yesod, Malchus, which are actually referred to as the 7 days of creation, because when Hashem created the world, in actual fact, every day, Hashem channeled his light through a different sphera, and every day of the week refers to a different sphera, which actually explains why Shabbos is considered the Shabbos queen, because it is expressed through the last sphera of Malchus, but that's a whole nother topic. Okay, so but for what's important for us today is to know about the system of intellect and emotions. So what we're going to learn over here is how the intellect of our godly soul produces, through meditation and reflection and use of its intellectual powers, produces the emotions of love and fear of God. In other words, first the intellect, and then It's the emotions. Now, why is this very important for us to know? It's very important for us to know because when we're going to discuss the animal soul also has intellect and emotions. However, it works in a completely opposite direction. Instead of producing emotions, brain first, heart second, the animal soul justifies its emotions. So it's heart first, brain second. So the emotions will start in the heart, and then you'll kind of like justify why you're feeling a certain way: anger, pride, jealousy, etc. Those are all attributes of the animal soul. But for the purposes of chapter 3 discusses how we can actually achieve a concept mentioned further on in Tanya called Moyach Shalit Alalev, mind over heart. How your mind can actually rule your heart. How you can produce healthy emotions of basically love and fear of Hashem. And love and fear of Hashem are two emotions, but all the emotional attributes in the spheres actually are all an offshoot of love and fear of Hashem, starting off with the two main ones, which are chesed, kindness, gevura, severity or holding back, which both represent love and kindness. And we're going to get into that in a minute. Tanya actually calls the intellect the parents of the emotions. In actual fact, to understand this, let's examine what each of these concepts represent. So Chachma, Bina, and Das. Chachma is a concept. It's made up of two words, koyachma, the potential of what is, and it's a concept. You don't understand it yet. You've heard about it. It's a concept which exists, but it hasn't been developed. It's only in potential state. Bina is when a person takes that concept and chews it over and understands it and asks questions and is able not only to understand it, but is able to explain it to somebody else. That is Bina. Bina is actual understanding of the concept. And Chachma and Bina are actually referred to as the father and the mother of intellect, in this very same way as biologically, the father is the potential of the child, and the mother actually puts into actuality, practically, the birth and the gestation of the child. That's why Chachma and Bina are considered the mother and the father of eventually the emotions, of the intellect and eventually the emotions. Now, what is Das? Das is something really very, very interesting, because Das comes after you have actually understood what you're learning. You've understood what the concept is, and you are now going to make it part of you. The word Das, knowledge, is used in the Torah for intimacy, in actual fact. When Adam Harishon, the first man, married Chava, it says, Adam yada es Chava. Adam knew Eve. He knew her. He related to her in an intimate way. He was one with her. That is what marriage is all about, to unite as one with another person. Das is when you unite as one with that knowledge. And we're going to speak, Tanya actually tells us what knowledge we should unite with. When you unite as one with that knowledge, that means that knowledge has become a part of you. You can talk about that to somebody else without even thinking. It's a part of you. You don't have to prepare. You've internalized it, you've reflected on it, you've meditated it, and it's a part of you. Now, Das actually ensures the sustainability of these emotions, because you could produce, when you think of a concept, let's say you're in a class and you learn something, wow, you become so inspired. If it remains in inspiration, that's just Chachma, maybe Bina, but it's not Das. Das is when you take a fleeting emotion and you reflect on it and you meditate on it and you actually make it as one with yourself. That creates a sustainable emotion, and it ensures permanence of that emotion. In actual fact, because we're talking about Chachma, Bina, and Das, your emotion that we're working on actually becomes 3D, three-dimensional. Chachma, Bina, and Das. Das is actually a bridge to the emotions. Chachma and Bina are not. Das is a bridge to the emotions, but can only occur after complete understanding. It also ensures something very interesting, and we're going to understand that from what we are encouraged by Tanya to meditate on and to reflect upon. It also ensures that your love of God, which you produce as a result of your intellect, is a love of God on His terms and not self-serving. Because love, although it's a very nice emotion, it can be either selfish or selfless. It feels good to love somebody. But if you love somebody on your terms, that is not true selfless love. It is selfish love. And we want to love Hashem on his terms, not on our terms. So Tanya in this chapter actually goes ahead and says, fine, you know what? You're going to use your intellect now to reflect on three things. Now, these three things, this is what I referred to in the beginning of the class as highlights, because Tanya in further chapters actually goes much deeper into these concepts and how they produce a love of Hashem and what type of love of Hashem it produces, because there are different types of love of Hashem. But Tanya briefly refers to three types of intellectual meditations which a person should reflect upon, and that is how God is memale kol almin. He fills all the worlds. What does it mean that God fills the worlds? Hashem is really infinite. Hashem, we cannot limit Hashem to a space and a time. However, there is a part of Hashem that fills the world according to the definitions of the world and according to the limitations of the world, whilst at the same time, Hashem is soivev kol almin. Hashem involves the world. Hashem transcends the world. Hashem is above the world because he is infinite. Those are the two concepts to reflect upon. And the third concept that Tanya tells us in this chapter is to reflect upon the fact that there is nothing else besides God. There is nothing else besides God. This is considered the unity of Hashem. When we say the unity of Hashem, it does not mean that there is only one God. It means that there is nothing else besides Hashem. Hashem is one means that everything in this world is God. And when we reflect upon these three topics, which will be delved into much more in a much deeper way in further chapters in Tanya, what happens is that these meditations bring about a true love and fear of Hashem. However, Tanya mentions the fear of Hashem, which comes first. So I want to mention this now because this is very important, and it actually relates to Chodesh Elul, very, very interestingly enough, because Tanya precedes the fear to love of God. Because first of all, fear of God is foundational. It is what gives us the concept of God, which is called Kabbalah's oil, which in further chapters of Tanya, that is necessary to have fear of God. And that's in chapter 41, discusses fear of God, which starts with assuming the yoke of heaven, even if you don't have the appropriate feelings. However, the fear of God that is mentioned in this chapter is not the fear of punishment. It is not something called yiras ha'onesh. It is not the fear of punishment, but it is something called yiras haroimamus, the fear or awe of Hashem's majesty. What is the difference between the two? Fear of punishment creates distance, whereas fear or awe, reverence of Hashem's majesty, of Hashem's grandeur, creates a desire to form closeness with Hashem. And that in turn creates a very fiery love. Now, I just want to stop here just for 1 second and just say how this actually connects to Chodesh Elul, in which we are right now. Many people mistakenly approach the process of tshuva, which we have to do in Chodesh Elul, as something to fear or as something to be sad about. Lots of guilty feelings, and that in turn causes sadness. Whereas the tshuva that we achieve in this month is actually a tshuva that should be done with great joy, because it is creating closeness between us and Hashem. It is not creating a greater distance between you and God. It is the culmination of, Tanya gives the mashal further on in further chapters, of when a prince who has been imprisoned and has been very, very far away from his home is finally coming home. That is reason for great joy. And we know that the godly soul, as we mentioned briefly last week, the godly soul is in fact imprisoned in our animal soul, imprisoned in our body, limited by our body. And when we do tshuva, we are actually returning the godly soul to its source, which is actually a reason for great joy. So tshuva should be done with great, great joy approaching the day of judgment. But again, the yira over here is not, the fear is not fear of punishment. It is fear of, or more of like a reverence of Hashem's majesty. And the love that comes out of this reverence is a love that is a craving for God. It is a craving for closeness of God. It is such a craving of closeness that it is a fiery love to the point that our soul wants to return to its source. It is fire. Now, what's fire? Fire is emotions. So you've created this amazing emotion of a love of God, and you want to get close to God, but you want to get close to God and to such an extent that your soul could actually expire from your body. So what happens? Because of the fact that the love was produced from the intellect, intellect is like water and emotions are like fire. So the water cools down the emotions or serves as a foundation for the emotions and keeps the soul rooted in the body, which is in essence the mission of the soul here is to remain in the body, to be able to do mitzvahs, because that's going to be next chapter, chapter 4, as we actually express our divine soul in thought, speech, and action, which is very important in any relationship. Any relationship, the actions that you do are more important sometimes than the feelings. You may feel a certain way, but if you act in alignment with your values, that's even more important. Nomi, which sentence would you like me to say again? I can't hear you. You got to unmute yourself.
Just the last sentence you were saying that was seems like extremely important. The sentence of what you were saying, that out of the craving of the closeness of Hashem, that fieriness, and then the emotions being water, so it balances that. It's just
okay. I'm gonna explain. Okay, there are two types of love of Hashem. Actually, there's one type of love of Hashem that's called karish ve'esh, like a fiery flame. It's a fiery emotion. Now, fire, we know, always goes upwards. So our soul is compared to a flame of a candle, always going upwards. We know that when you turn a candle upside down, even so, the flame still goes upwards. That is very much like our godly soul, which always really wants to be united with its source being Hashem. However, our body keeps our soul rooted over here in this world for the mission that Hashem has entrusted us to do, which is to do mitzvahs in order to make this world a dwelling place for Hashem. Right? Now, there is a calmer love of God, which is called a love that is like water. A love that is like water is like when you've arrived finally at the stream after thirsting for days and you finally drank that water, you're now, you're satiated, right? So it's a calmer love. Now, besides for the emotional aspect, we also can apply fire and water to the mind and the heart. You know, when you see someone who's like a cooler kind of a person, like a more of an intellectual kind of a person, whereas you have an emotional person is more fiery, an intellectual person is cooler, like water. So when we have this harmony between mind and heart, when we have the harmony in the way that the mind is producing the healthy Avas Hashem, the healthy emotion of love of God, it keeps the neshama rooted in the body by kind of reminding the neshama that it has a purpose. It douses the fire with a little bit of water. So because the nature of the godly soul is to want to leave the body. It's called klois hanefesh, which is actually the mistake that Aaron's sons made when they went into the Kodesh HaKodashim, the sanctuary of sanctuaries, because they loved God so much that they decided that the best way that they could serve God was to expire, to die. Why was this the wrong thing? Because our objective here in this world is not to expire. Our objective in this world is to remain here and to complete our mission and complete our purpose in this world. I hope that explains that better, Nomi. Okay, so again, the thirsting love comes from the element of fire in the soul, whereas the intellect reigns in the emotions to remain in the body. Now, why do we say that love and fear of God are the two general emotions and everything is specific? Because love, when you have the emotion of love, draws you to something. When you love something, you want it. You love ice cream, you want to eat ice cream. You love Torah, you want to learn Torah. You love doing mitzvahs, you want to do mitzvahs. You love Hashem, you want to do what he tells you to do. Fear is a general emotion which expresses what you are repelled to. When you fear something, if you're afraid of dogs, you're not going to go near a dog. If you're afraid of Fire, you're not going to put your hand into the fire. Fear creates distance, whereas love creates closeness. So that is why those are the two general emotions. And then everything else is offshooted from that. Now, again, why is this all important? Why is this all important? You know, it's like funny because really when we learn Tanya, we kind of think to ourselves, well, you know, the godly soul is not that important. What's really important, what I really have to figure out over here is my animal soul. Why is my animal soul driving me crazy, making me confused, making me want to sin, making me go against the will of God, making me have these emotions that I can't control, fear, jealousy, anger, hopelessness, all these, you know, bad emotions which come from the animal soul. It's exactly because we know the structure of the godly soul that we can stop the animal soul in its tracks and influence the animal soul from the godly soul. So if that is the whole concept of Mayach Shalat al Alev. So in other words, instead of justifying, oh, you know why I'm angry at so-and-so? Because she did da 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 da. You know why I'm so worried? Because of this and that and the other. You know why I'm so jealous? Because instead of justifying your emotions, you now have a tool to access your higher self, which is really your nefesh elokis, your godly soul, in order for your nefesh elokis to produce the correct emotions of love and fear of God, which in turn will help you look at any situation with the correct perspective with love and fear of God. Are there any questions till now? Okay, so in conclusion, your godly soul, this chapter is really about your inner self. First of all, your true identity, because although we may think that our true identity is something not so godly, like we will sometimes have limiting beliefs such as, this is my personality. Our personality really comes from the animal soul. Our natural traits come from the animal soul. So those are limiting beliefs, which you can then turn on its head and create different beliefs, which come from the godly soul and create different emotions, which you then reflect upon and they become one with you. It's also not only your true identity, but it's also your inner self. Whereas next lesson, we will be learning about our outer expression of what we actually feel, which are the actions. The next lesson is about the expressions of the soul, which are thought, speech, and action. And thought, speech, and action are actually easier to change in a way than the inner workings of your soul, which is why this chapter is so important, because if you want to be able to behave in alignment with your values, which are godly, then you really have to have in the forefront of your mind all the godly knowledge, the knowledge of Hashem. You become more intimately knowledgeable with Hashem, and obviously Hashem is infinite and we can always learn about Hashem and we can always develop more and more knowledge about Hashem. But the knowledge of Hashem, which is going to be developed in the future chapters in Tanya, is going to give birth to these emotions, which you can then use to penetrate and illuminate your animal soul, which at the moment is being covered up with what we call a klipa, a shell, which is concealing godliness. And that is, in a nutshell, chapter 3. Let me see if I left out anything. Okay. Okay, any questions?